Rarely is a title more fitting for the actual content of a game. Adrift is a game about floating in outer space, or more accurately, floating among the remnants of a space station that recently encountered an unexplained catastrophe, with the player piloting the sole survivor in an attempt to get back to Earth. If you just got flashbacks to the movie Gravity, you're pretty much spot on, though I'd say the game also takes a ton of inspiration from 2001: A Space Odyssey as well, which is kinda obvious because that movie also was highly influential to Gravity in the first place. In any case, I'm kind of ambivalent towards this game. On the one hand, it's about outer space, and even if you know me only fleetingly, you know that I love outer space and everything that has to do with it. On the other hand, it's a walking, or more accurately floating simulator with pretty scenery, but little to no gameplay. And it's also intended as a showpiece for VR. What I really like about the game is its sense of atmosphere, ironically. Floating through the vacuum of space is an awesome experience, and the beautiful visuals of the game truly make you feel like you're there, even without a VR headset. But after that initial wow factor wears off, what you're left with is what the developers even explicitly state as a first-person experience, and not a game. The only challenge to the player is indeed the traversal of the space station. The 6 degrees of freedom mean that controlling the protagonist is fairly difficult, especially since for once inertia actually matters. Turning on the booster in order to move forward means that you'll be doing so until another force acts upon you, just like in real outer space. There's also a break, so to speak, where you'll stop moving at all if you engage it, but I found that usually it's just better to correct your course manually. The controls can be a bit of a pain at times, especially because collisions with anything in this space station also hurt you. Apparently the main character has never heard of using her hands or feet to dampen the impacts. And somehow I doubt that the space agencies in the future where this takes place stop producing EVA suits that are able to withstand more than a speck of dust. Taking damage in this case also means losing oxygen, which is the main resource in the game. It's used to breathe, it's a general health indicator, and you need it for thrust. Now usually I detest these kinds of systems where you spend the majority of the game keeping a meter full that drains within seconds. You know, the type of stuff that all bad survival games feature. But in this case it actually makes sense. Using oxygen as a means of propulsion in the case of a damaged suit is not a dumb idea, and as such I can't fault the game for it. Especially because this is a situation without alternatives. You're in outer space, there are no other resources. Plus, you're never really that much in danger of running out of oxygen since there are tons of canisters littered around the wreckage. Not very realistic, but at least it's not too tedious, and it's a nice way of telling the player that they're on the right track. No canisters? Probably not where you're supposed to be going. And speaking of realism, the entire premise is also heavily flawed. Floating around between pieces of space station debris is basically impossible because the space station itself already needs to maintain quite an amount of speed to stay in orbit. There's no way our protagonist is wearing an EVA suit with enough propulsion to zip around between these parts of the wreck. With this also taking place during a disaster, you'd think that achieving the goal of getting home through one of these escape pods would also require you to solve some puzzles, but unfortunately that's not the case. Very early on you're introduced to 4 systems that are all broken and need to be repaired in order to get home. We'll just let it slide for the moment that a critical system such as an escape pod, which is specifically designed to get you home in the case of an emergency just like this one we're finding ourselves in, would operate independently and not require different operational systems that were part of the main space station. In any case, the way to fix these 4 systems is identical for every single one. You need to float towards a specific part of the station, hit a few buttons to fulfill a sub-objective in order to free up the path to the actual computers you'll need to reach in order to get the necessary items to restore power to the individual systems, and at the same time also upgrade your EVA suit to get more oxygen, faster movement and more durability. Having these missions play out largely identically is not all that interesting because you always already know what's about to happen next. And I know that if you break down almost every other game to the most basic components, you'll find that this structure is present in almost all of them. But the catch there is that there's usually actual gameplay to challenge and entertain the player. And in the good kind of walking simulator, that's usually done through puzzles, which this game unfortunately doesn't feature. With the game being so light on gameplay, you'd think that the developers would instead focus on an engaging story. Unfortunately, this attempt is not really a success. I simply lack way too much information to feel involved. The rest of the crew that was in the space station died during the disaster, but we never know what exactly caused it. It's hinted at that the main character is at fault, with the ending cutscenes featuring an audio transmission of another character specifically blaming her, and all the audio logs I found also seem to hint at the same thing. The main character even describes herself as being more comfortable with asking for forgiveness rather than asking for permission, which seems to indicate that her behavior was against orders and therefore caused the incident. The problem with this though is that all of the reasons given for this conflict of interest between our character, her subordinates, as well as her higher-ups is given to us through sci-fi technobabble. I never got to know what's actually at stake here, how this entire situation developed in the first place, and as such I simply did not feel invested in the story by the end. So with that said, unfortunately all the pretty pictures in the world and the authentic atmosphere can't seem to make me feel like this game is worth recommending to others, especially not for the price they're asking for. Fortunately, I paid nowhere near full price thanks to a recent Humble Bundle where I got it for less than $1, but it's the same old argument again. $20 for roughly 4 hours is too much, especially for 4 hours with no gameplay in it and as such no real replayability. Which is a shame really. I wanted to like this game. I'm not averse to walking simulators if they have something to offer, and like I said, I love outer space more than you can imagine, but this is ultimately kind of a letdown. I guess this could also have something to do with the game also being developed for VR specifically, but honestly, after thinking about it, I really wouldn't want to play the game in VR. Bumping into things causes the camera to jolt around unpredictably, especially since you can bump into things with your body as well, which is something you just have to somehow guess where it is in this virtual world since you can't actually see it. So imagining this with VR already makes my stomach churn.